All right, welcome, folks. Welcome to Rock Show Critiques channel here on YouTube. And today we got a brand new show we're debuting here. And this one here is we're going to take a discography of a band and just go through them chronologically, album by album. And to help me do that is going to be none other than who else? Mr. Chris Keebzak. Welcome.
What's up?
So it's been a while since we got a chance to get on the air and talk some music. So this one's going to be good. So we decided to pick a nice small catalog here because we want to test this out and see how it goes. So our first band, we're going to pick none other than the boys from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Cinderella. So just a quick rundown on Cinderella. They actually formed way back in 1983 initially. And as far as their albums are concerned, their first one was released in '86. They made 4 albums total, and we're going to discuss each one a little more in depth and in detail here. And basically, the lineup pretty much for all the albums, pretty much were obviously the songwriter, guitarist, vocalist Tom Kiefer, bassist Eric Brittingham, guitarist Jeff LaBar. And for the most part, Fred Corey, a little interesting on the drummer Fred Corey because he didn't play on all these albums. Oddly enough, even though he was actually considered a part of the band in on some of the albums, he still didn't play on. So I don't know what the reasoning was on some of those, but anyhow, let's kick things off here. We're going to start off with the 1986 release, Night Songs. And Night Songs was the debut, and that was released on Polygram, also the Mercury label for Polygram Records, produced by Andy Johns. And as far as the record sales go, this album shot right out of the gate, went triple platinum. It reached number 3 on the U.S. album charts, which remains, obviously their highest charting album, and was released June 9th, 1986. And obviously, you might have came in a lot later than that, but tell us when you first tell us about your take on the album and what you like, what you didn't like, and everything else there.
Well, initially, getting into hair metal as a kid in the late '90s, early 2000s, I got it. It was probably early. It was definitely early 2000s that I would have gotten into Cinderella, and um, came across a CD at a store and bought it. And the cover is what drew me in because of how much I loved glam and hair metal at that point. But obviously, it was completely a different sound than what the other bands like that were. So to me, I immediately put them into almost the same category as Great White. Not necessarily that the music was that close to the same, because obviously Cinderella borrowed a lot more from bands like Aerosmith and MC5 and stuff like that. But I feel that Great White and Cinderella sort of broke from the pack a little bit, especially with um, the blues type vibe in their songs. So I think the biggest problem that Cinderella had and why they aren't much bigger than they should have been ever is because of and Larry Mazer, their manager, says this all the time, putting them in those outfits and in those clothing and dressing like a glam and hair metal band with all the makeup and stuff, sort of like Poison, is what sort of screwed that band over, why a lot more people didn't listen to them for the sound. I feel like grunge fans would have even picked up on them a little better if it wasn't for that thought on what they look like based on the Night Songs album cover. That being said, Night Songs I feel is the best in the bunch for a Cinderella record. Amazing songs on that album. I don't think it's ever been matched. It's been close, but songs like Nobody's Fool, Somebody Save Me, and Shake Me, obviously the 3 biggest songs on the record, are just legendary. I mean, not a lot of songs hit the way those do from back in the day like that, and I feel this one does. And then Hell on Wheels and Push Push, a lot of great songs. I don't think there's one real clunker on the record. Decent length for a record at 36 minutes. And yeah, by far one of my probably definitely my top five hair metal records of all time for Night Songs. So what a great intro record though, huh? What do you feel about it? Were you privy to them before that record came out?
Well, I don't think anybody really was. No one knew about him really, unless you lived in Philadelphia and got to see him touring. But obviously they came crashing out of the gate real hard, obviously, with you know, Shake Me. That was the song that broke them. That video was on MTV all over the place. I remember the first time I ever saw it, I thought it was Steven Tyler up there almost
Right.
because of the way, I didn't know any better back
With the
then.
scars and all that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
He definitely looked like a good lookalike there for sure. But the sound was a little bit more metallic, a little bit more, this album is definitely different than any of their other albums in their catalog. And this song, I heard this song, and then they started playing a few other cuts on the radio, and obviously just fell for this album. It was such a great album of its time. You listen to it now, and it doesn't really sound dated to me, only because of the fact the songs are just so good and they're so catchy. Somebody Save Me. When they start playing that, even Tom Kiefer's solo band, when they play that riff in concert nowadays, it just whole place comes alive. They know that riff, they know that song, although, it only reached number 66 on the charts. And oddly enough, Shake Me didn't even it failed to chart, on the actual singles chart. But obviously the video is what helped break it, because they played it on MTV and it was always winning their top video of the week or whatever kind of honors they would give out to videos,
Right.
most requested or whatever the case may be. Um, so yeah, and then obviously Nobody's Fool was the song that really put them on the map because it reached number 13 on the charts, and that's another one that's a classic concert staple. Kiefer's never gonna not play these songs in concert until he's done touring, I would assume. He'll try to sing it the best he can, whatever he can do there. But yeah, I think this album definitely was a great debut. And and if you look at the other songs on the album here, that maybe that didn't get a bunch of airplay. You've got to remember, Nothing for Nothing was a cool song because uh, John Bon Jovi sang background vocals on that one and In From the Outside, so he had some outside help. Obviously, are you familiar with Bill Mattson, Chris?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay, he was the lead singer in Tangier, and he was part of the Philadelphia metal scene there, along with
Okay.
Cinderella. So they went way back. He actually did background vocals on Shake Me, and for this album, we were mentioning about how Fred Corey, at this point, Jody Cortez played drums on all the tracks on this album. Um, so definitely a great debut, and it helped pave the way for them to grow from there. Obviously each album, as we're going to discuss here, is different from the next, even though some people might not see it that way if you're on the outside looking in,
Right.
or in from the outside, as they say.
Right.
So yeah, so I think it's a solid debut. What's your overall take on this album?
Oh, I love it. I think song after song, it's I mean starting with Night Songs all the way to Back Home Again. It's like I said, I think the album cover does it very little justice because everyone expects it to be something it's not. I feel like they may have had a career like the Black Crowes if they didn't have the look associated with it. And like I said, Larry Mazer said the worst thing he ever did was put them in those costumes and put them on the front of that record because people immediately thought it was a specific style of music and they were wrote that way. I mean, granted, this album is very much a hair metal album, more so than any of them, in my
The
opinion.
only thing I'll say in that defense of that move, it's probably the reason why they got discovered. Let's face facts. Regardless of how he feels now, there's a chance if they would have done the Black Crowes way or no makeup, they might not have ever gotten this far. Who knows? There's no way to really know.
Right.
But let's move on to the next album. The next album, obviously, Long Cold Winter, came out 2 years later, July 5th, 1988, also on Mercury. Went 3 times platinum, and it landed at number 10 on the US charts. Great follow up, especially considering it was 2 years after the release of the Night Songs. So they still had the momentum to land in the top 10, but I think that that was all due to obviously how strong the songs are on Long Cold Winter. A stylistic change here, obviously, and we'll talk about that. But same lineup as before, with the exception, it shows Fred Corey was credited on the album, but he really didn't play on it, and that's a known fact. They had a couple different guys. Cozy Powell played drums on pretty much every track except Second Wind, and then of course the former Heart drummer Denny Carmassi, he played drums on Second Wind. So another album that Fred's there for the touring on all these tours and everything, but he just didn't play on the album. Which is kind of strange when you got a drummer who doesn't play on the album. I don't know if any of that's ever been explained, of why, or what, anything like that for
Yeah,
each
I was going
album.
to ask you if there was ever a reason behind that or if it was just kept quietly.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah, I haven't gotten any exact facts, so that's why I don't want to jump to conclusions. Uh, but anyhow, what's your take on Long Cold Winter?
Good album, like you said, definitely different than Night Songs. I like Night Songs a lot better by a large margin. But some of my favorite songs from Cinderella's catalogs in here, like Bad Seamsters Blues, is a great opening track. I mean, you probably most of the times you've seen them, they probably open with that, correct?
Yeah, they opened with it on a couple tours. Actually,
I've seen them do it twice, I believe.
yeah, they did it on the Long Cold Winter tour where they went right into Falling Apart at the Seams. The two kind of go together, but not always. There was a time when they also on the next album they would play Bad Seamstress Blues to start it off, and then they would go into The More Things Change. So
Right.
there's a bunch of different things they tried differently. I like that. I like the fact that they were ingenious on trying to change things up tour to tour in the beginning there with the songs and the way they performed them. And yeah, yeah. So that you're right. That's a great call on. I like how those two songs go right together though
Yeah,
on the
for sure.
album. And they did that on the Long Cold Winter tour too. So
And I'm not a ballad guy for the most part, as you know, but one of my favorite ballads, at least from that era, comes on this album. Coming Home, I think's amazing. Very underlooked ballad from that era. But yeah, really good album. Very, very bluesy. Again, really doesn't it's hard to call them a hair or glam metal band when they're this. I even feel they're in a different spot than like Great White. Like they're much more blues based. Like I said, it's almost like Black Crows to me. I feel they have more of that classic rock vibe mixed with a little bit of country and blues. But yeah, great follow-up album. Definitely my second favorite of the bunch of the four. So yeah, Long Cold Winter. I love the white album cover as well. I think the purple on the white looks really cool. So for being a pretty bland cover for a record, I really dig it. So what do you think of the cover? Do you like it?
well, they're giving you the impression that it's whiteout, like a winter blizzard or
Yeah,
something,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that's why it stands out so cool. But yeah, I
Right.
like it too. Yeah, I just wish it would have been nice to have more of a picturesque setting in there with some snow or something. But it's
Yeah,
cool the
see,
way
I
it
don't think
is.
so. I sort of like the way it is, but yeah, because you could sort of make your own, judgment on what the record cover is supposed to, signify. So.
All right, so my take on this album, obviously, I got to see this album when it came out right from the get-go, and I also got to see the tour where they played Niagara Falls Convention Center. Cinderella obviously was their tour. They put on a great performance. Winger was cool. Wasn't a fan of the Bullet Boys at this point in time, but at least they brought out a pretty strong tour package with them for their first headlining tour. I thought it was pretty cool. And the weird thing was they didn't even start headlining for this tour until after the album was already out a while. They were still doing like they opened for AC/DC on this when Long Cold Winter came out, so they were still opening, but their opening shows were going over so good, and then the album started selling more and more, and then finally they got pushed right into headlining, which was great. So you got to see a band go from being an opener, and going right to the headliner within a matter of, just a little bit of time, 2 years, 3 years maybe, yeah. 3 years later, and there they are headlining. So, and then you figure, like most headlining bands, you figure, oh, they'll always be headlining. This is great. They're going to keep on coming out with album after album. You never expected it to end, the way things ended, sadly. But getting back to the album here, obviously, looking at the songs here, obviously you had Gypsy Road was the first single. Another song that didn't really do much on the charts and only hit number 51, but the video was strong, MTV was strong. And that's the way rock was working back in that day. You didn't have to have a top 40 hit for the album to do good if you had already name recognition out there. So obviously, Gypsy Road is probably one of the most known Cinderella songs to this day, although it didn't even make much, it didn't even crack the top 40. Here we are, it's still one of their biggest songs to date, and they all usually end their show with it. So it's pretty cool. Um, and then of course they had the mega hit, Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone, which,
Right.
hit number 12. I'm surprised it wasn't lower because you used to hear this song everywhere, and it's such a great ballad. It's one of those ballads that you never get sick of. You know how some of them you just get tired of, but this one I never did. They ended up releasing The Last Mile as the next single. I think they made a mistake with that. That was a mistake releasing that song. They had a few better ones on it, and it only reached number 36. I mean, yeah, it reached top 40, cool. But they made amends with the follow-up single, which was the last single released, which was Coming Home, peaking at number 20. And obviously Coming Home was just one of the great standout songs of their catalog. Um, still done today by Tom Kiefer and his Tom Kiefer band. There's a couple other songs on here I want to give some recognition to. Yeah, I guess they didn't really have much of a choice as far as what to choose for singles because a lot of these songs are more blues based. It's not like you're going to release the 5 minute and 24-second Long Cold Winter as a single because
Right.
that's more blues based. It's a great song, but it's just not one that that's going
You
to be
can't really release it as a single,
right.
right? Yeah,
The only
yeah,
song they could have tried to do something with, and I talked to Tom about this one time in an interview, was "Take Me Back." Great song. He loved mentioning how he played the slide guitar on it and how he
cool.
wrote the song. It was pretty cool. I think that's one of those songs that it's the last song on the album, so it kind of hides. So maybe a lot of people don't really are familiar with it, but it's definitely a deep cut that I highly recommend from their catalog. No doubt about that. So anyhow, I think they did a great job on following up with the Nexus album. I feel their sound started to change. It went from that glam sound more to a bluesier sound, which we'll see what happens on the next album even more so.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go on to so you said you liked the other one, you liked Night Songs better. What you
Yeah, I do, but I still love Long Cold Winter. But yes, I
right.
feel Night Songs is by far the better record. At least it geared towards what, the more than my style, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. So the next album we got, digging deep here, we are going to none other than 1990. So here we are going to the cusp of the 1990s, and hair metal is still going strong at this point. The band releases their next album. Obviously, that is Heartbreak Station, which was released in November of 1990. Also on Mercury, where all their labels, the only label they ever had for their four albums. Peaked at number 19, and it went platinum, but that was it. The downside to this album was we did see them go back to more like a support act where they weren't like an opener anymore, but they were no longer a headliner. You know, they probably did some shows on their own in smaller venues, but they weren't able to get the large venues filled like they did on the Long Cold Winter tour. So
Right.
they paired him back up with David Lee Roth again in Extreme on that tour. So that was an interesting tour. But I thought Cinderella was the best band out of the three of them on that tour. They just killed it. Um, no doubt about it in my book. Heartbreak Station album, not as good as Long Cold Winter in my take. I think it's definitely a shift in the band's sound. You know, even more so than the previous album, Long Cold Winter. It was more of a bluesier, stripped down approach. I feel that Kiefer really loves this album, and I think the main highlight for me on this album was Shelter Me. It's got a very, very Rolling Stone-ish type vibe. Um, and it's weird because this song really didn't do that good back in 1990, but later on throughout their career, it seemed like this song started getting a life of its own, and they really started to play it like as an encore, and they started treating it with more respect in the way that they performed it. Kind of surprised because, like I said, this really wasn't that big of a song when the album had come out. They, you know, obviously there's other ones that they paid more attention to,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So yeah, Heartbreak Station, you know, this one, um, Fred did play on the drums on it. So finally he gets his drum credit on the album, and it has a bunch of additional musicians, but that's because of all the different instruments that were used on this album. There's a lot of saxophone, percussion, clarinet, uh, steel pedal guitar, all kinds of things here, strings. So, you know, so they had a lot of people to help make this album. And this one was produced by John Jansen and Tom Kiefer.
Well, now Kiefer pretty much wrote the entire record himself, right? I
Yeah,
think
the only
it's
song he wrote with anybody was "Love's Got Me Doing Time," which
with
he wrote with
with
Eric
Aaron. Yeah.
Brittingham. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, what's your take on this one?
Um, I like it. I think obviously it went more towards it went further along with the style of Long Cold Winter opposed to Night Songs. Obviously, the music seemed to be pushing exactly where Kiefer wanted it to, and he obviously wanted to make sure he had a hold on that with writing the record. So a couple, the album does sort of come off a little bit same-ish, for lack of a better word. There's some good songs on there though. Sick for the Cure. I love that song. Never felt that got enough love. Electric Love's a really good song. Um, and again, Shelter Me, like you said, very Rolling Stone. Um, so it's in that style more. I wish it would be a little bit more unique. I wish there was a couple more outside writers, and maybe another outside producer where if Kiefer wrote the album, maybe he shouldn't have had so much of a hand in the production. It's sort of like what happened with to the Kiss albums that Paul Stanley did. Great records, but the production sucks because there was no outside person looking in. So at least Kiefer had that. The album does have its diversity a little bit with songs like Love Gone Bad.
Hmm.
And The More Things Change, I like too. The More Things Change, a great song. Again, good album, but I feel it pales in comparison to the first two, especially with the consistency. I feel there's not too much consistency for an album that was basically written by one person.
Yeah, I mean, I did have this. They did have this John Jansen produce it along with Tom.
No,
Not
no, and
sure,
I get that.
not sure how much influence or how that all worked out. I never even heard of him, so I don't really know.
Right.
But you know, at least he wasn't just him producing like Paul Stanley did, pretty much. So, but you could
Oh
you
yeah, Paul still had other people helping him, but yeah, no, I get what you're saying though. That
right.
the Kiefer had someone else actually producing the record. But as you know, whenever somebody in the band is named as a producer on the album, it's pretty much their final call. So, but yeah, no, I do like the album. Obviously, it was pushing in one direction and sort of stayed there. And I don't think anyone realized that it was going to be the second last album for the band that long ago in 1990. But yeah, third and second to last record.
All right. So the main thing I think of this album where it went wrong was it does have a lot of, to me, a lot of filler on it near the end of the album,
Right.
especially.
Yeah.
Like the first five songs, great, you know. And then it just kind of loses its fizzle when it gets down to the winds of change when it closes out. I'm not really that deep into the blues, so that's why I didn't really appreciate a lot of the second half of the album. But I think the problem is they needed one more single or one or two more singles that were gonna get airplay and help push this album. You know, "Shelter Me" is like I had mentioned. You know, it got a big video on MTV along with "Heartbreak Station," but the problem is it wasn't enough to push it over the top. And "Shelter Me," while it did peak at number 36 on the charts at this point in time, um, you know, it just wasn't enough to help propel this album. I mean, it still went platinum, I think mostly on the, you know, the reputation of their name and how far along they were in their career. And, you know, they were still kicking ass live and getting a lot of, you know, some airplay on the radio with those two songs, "Heartbreak Station" and "Shelter Me." But like you said, the two songs that I really feel are the best two songs on the album, in my estimation, were none other than "Sick for the Cure," which I've always loved, and I did get to see them do that live on that tour. And of course, "The More Things Change." Those are the two songs that I feel are like the best songs on the album.
Yeah.
And
I would
you
say
know,
those.
even today, Kiefer Band, they only play "Shelter Me" and "Heartbreak Station." Really, they really touch anything else on this album. So that just goes to show you how you know, this album definitely wasn't that great, you know. And I feel that this is kind of where the wheels started to fall off, in my estimation, as you'll
Oh
see
yeah.
with the next. I don't even blame this one on grunge yet, because at this point it's only 1990. Grunge really didn't hit till 91, 92,
92. Yeah.
and it you can't even blame it on that. I just feel that they went more left than they should have on this one. You know, I know they were trying to carry on what they started on "Long Cold Winter," but they definitely made a mistake, obviously, no doubt about that in my estimation.
Right.
All right, let's move on. We got one more album to discuss here, and I'll talk about it real quick and I'll let you give your thoughts, and that's gonna be the final Cinderella album, "Still Climbing." Took 4 years in the making here. November 8th, 1994. We never even thought if it was ever gonna see the light of day, but so here we are now in the middle of grunge, 1994. Everything's grunge. No hair bands left, really. This album did chart though. Number 178, all the way at number 178. Chris, what do you got to say about that one?
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, every band was trying to dip their toes in frustrating music, as I call it, because of grunge. So having a band where every album is sort of the first three albums they put out are the only other three albums they have out are pretty much one style of music. Now, I don't feel Still Climbing they tried to completely jump off board of that style, but obviously they were trying to be different and it just didn't necessarily translate. I mean, you got to figure they tried to add in a little bit of glam stuff too, especially for that time period in 94. But the album came at obviously a very, very weird time. I do enjoy a couple of the songs like Blood from a Stone and Freewheelin', but long record, 11 songs. Just I again, not a lot to write home about, not a lot that really stick out, but a couple saving graces. I think Still Climbing is a pretty good track as well. But yeah, obviously now they don't touch anything off of this album, right? Or Kiefer doesn't touch anything off of Still Climbing, does he?
Just "Hot and Bothered."
Okay, yeah, which also another good song, I think. But yeah, doesn't really scream. Like I said, I like Cinderella a lot, and I always find myself going back to especially Night Songs and Long Cold Winter, but Still Climbing when listening to this again to go through this, I realize it just really nothing screams individuality at all. It's a very one-dimensional record that you listen to once and you're sort of done with it.
Well, I think a lot of the problem with this album wasn't all, you know, human situation going on here, because you got to remember he started losing his voice in 1991, and he got a vocal cord paralysis and during the recording of this album, which is the one of the main reasons why it was delayed, unfortunately. So surgery and the recovery time really pushed everything back.
Right,
And he had to relearn how to sing and retrain his voice. And that's one of the reasons why I think you hear the vocals are much different on this album compared to any of the other Cinderella albums. It wasn't just because he was trying to do it on purpose. He had no choice. Um, so you can't really fault anybody when it comes to that. The only thing you can probably say is too bad all that downtime, he just couldn't figure out a way to write stronger songs, in reality. And Hot and Bothered, getting back to that one, I think the reason why they play that one because it's the most well-known song on this album because of the fact it also appeared in Wayne's World, the
right.
movie,
Yeah.
so that's
Mhm.
another. So they basically just slapped it on as an afterthought because the movie came out in 1992. So we got an extra bonus track out of it, which is nice, and that's
Yeah.
probably the best song on the album, sadly enough. But that's not to say, like you said, I think you're right. I like Blood from a Stone. I like probably the best ballad on the album is Hard to Find the Words is a good song. All Comes Down, but just not in that traditional Cinderella way that we were all used to. I think that's the issue. And one more note I have to mention on here: Fred did not play on this album. I don't know
Right.
what the situation was at that point, but of course they called in none other than the jack of all trades, the man who saved Sammy Hagar's tour this time around, none other than Kenny Aronoff. So he's
Yeah.
who
Mm.
hasn't this guy played with is more like what his resume should look like. That guy's played with just about everybody.
Yeah, he can get any gig he wants, that's for sure.
Yeah, so and another interesting note is they got John Purdell played on keyboards and piano on this album, the Hammond B3. Of course, he's known as a famous producer who sadly passed away in 2003, but he did a lot of acclaimed artists from this era. He worked with as a producer and engineer and um, keyboard player with
Right.
not only Cinderella but Alice Cooper, Poison, L.A. Guns, Kicks. Another guy that's a who's who here.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so I just feel like I said with the downtime, I was hoping for some stronger songs. We were waiting and waiting and waiting for this album. It finally comes out, but unfortunately, I just feel it just came out at the wrong time. And it just wasn't what people were expecting, sadly. And
And it's unfortunate that nothing came after it.
because remember, Cinderella was supposed to also go on that portrait label and release an album of new material around the same time Rat and Great White did.
Right.
They were signed around 99. They were signed by John Kalodner to Sony Records. However, the band was dropped by the label before a new album could be released, mostly because of this whole lawsuit that stems from Mercury Records. Not sure what it was all about. Obviously, that's something that we may never know the truth until Tom writes his book, hopefully someday,
Hopefully soon, yeah.
because I'm sure he'll give his take on everything clear as a bell there. But yeah, I mean, so overall, sadly, Cinderella still managed to tour over those years after the last album and everything. We got to see many tours until about 2012 that they came to Bronze here, obviously in Western New York. And Bronze ended up being like the pretty much the last Cinderella show on Earth, on ground. Because the
Yeah,
only shows they did after this were a couple of Monsters of Rock cruises. And so we got to see probably the last Cinderella show on ground here in Western New York. And who would have thought about it at the time? We had no idea that it was going to
right.
happen. And it's just crazy to think after all these years.
Where did we see me and you see Naked Beggars somewhere, which was Eric's band, right?
With
Yeah, we
Jeff. It was
seen it
Eric and Jeff.
with
Yep.
Jeff, that's right. And that was at Club Infinity. That was pretty
Yep.
cool. That was with Jeff's wife, or was it
Eric's.
Eric's wife? Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah.
was a really good show. I remember that. That plus the three times I've seen Cinderella, I feel lucky. I really want to go see Kiefer and see what he brings to the table and how these songs sound with him and his band. You've seen him quite a few times, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not the same as seeing Cinderella, but I think he does the music with justice for what he can do right now. You got to remember, he's aging now. His voice isn't what it once was. He's gone through many different vocal surgeries, and the way he's got to do things to take care of his voice right now, it's not easy. I just give him credit for being out there still trying to put on the best show that he can. I mean,
Of course,
most
yeah.
people would have threw the towel in by now, probably but it's two solo albums. It's got some good stuff on there. I would actually probably rank the solo albums higher than I would Still Climbing,
Oh, well, me
sadly.
too. I was gonna say the first solo album he put out was amazing. I haven't
Yeah.
listened to it in years, but I remember really enjoying it for like a year or two after it came out.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the two albums definitely it was finally good to see, the first one, The Way Life Goes, because 2013, it was that's a long time from that time till 1994 till 2013, the last time he ever came out with new material. And then in 2019, they surprised us by finally coming out with Rise. So hopefully they're working on some new albums. Who knows? He's a
Yeah,
songwriter. I don't think he ever stopped writing songs. We'll see. What he has up his sleeve. Going forward. Hopefully he's got one more album in him.
yeah, I
And
know.
yeah, definitely check him out. If you get to see Tom Kiefer band comes in your area, definitely check them out. I highly recommend it. If you want to see the Cinderella songs, they're the only ones out there playing them right now. So you ain't,
Yeah,
unless you're going to go to some bar and catch some band that doing a bunch of 80s hits, that's about the only way you're going to see any of these performances live. So you must see Tom Kiefer. Must see.
yeah, very true.
All right. Anything else you care to add?
No, no, just that the best part about Cinderella is that when I want to listen to a band from that era that sounds different than the pack, that's who I go for. So, so yeah, no, very unique band, and especially with only four albums, it's very unique to have that small of a discography for how long that band has been around for. So interesting for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, and they were still doing a lot of big headlining shows, even years later after they hadn't had an album out of new material.
Right.
So definitely, yep, I hear you on that. All right, so that's our first discography. We go album by album, and we got a couple more planned. And I hope you guys like it. Hope you got a lot of information out of it, and the best thing I can highly recommend is give these songs that we mentioned that you might not have heard of some listens and see what you think of them and comment, in our link there down below, and it's all about the band and their songs, and let us know, what you think and how much you like the band and which album you might like the best and all that kind of good stuff. That's the kind of stuff that makes good conversation, and that's what we hope to the whole point of this was to get some talking about Cinderella. Obviously we picked them because they do have a small catalog, and we know they're not making any more albums, and that's just the way that it goes. So,
Absolutely.
all
Cool.
right, stay tuned for more. Take care.
See ya.